Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche, or old newspapers from the past, in the public domain, and we look at them and see what we can learn from them. I find the past has many lessons to teach us. So on this microfiche time capsule, we are looking at an article from Kansas Farmer, 1918, 5th of January. And this article is titled German War Practices. I have no idea what this is about. I have not read it ahead of time, and I thought it might be fun for us to look at what was reported back during World War I. Recall that the United States was fighting against the Germans, so it is bound to be a very negative article. However, I don't think that the Americans used a whole lot of different tactics, but let's take a look. German War Practices, some of the blackest pages in all history, comprising a documentary record of deeds that make one despair of the future of the human race, are found in a book named German War Practices, which has just been issued at the government printing office by the Committee on Public Information for free distribution. It is edited by Professor D.C. Munro of Princeton and other scholars. Wow, interesting. I am not aware of this book. I don't know if it's still around. You know what? Let's go check. 1918? No, well, this was January, so probably 1917. All I'm getting is, information about World War I. Let's see. Book? Oh, there's a book called The German War, and they're trying to sell that to me. German War Practices, paperback, January 1, 1917. There you go. By Dana C. Munro and George Creel. Still around. Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of the Navy. George Creel was the Secretary of the Navy. That's interesting. So it's still around. Apparently you can buy it used on Amazon. It is very old. There you go. Still around. I doubt that people really read it, but hey, there you go. The dumbfounding evidence which this book presents to the jury of mankind is drawn mainly from German and American sources and includes official proclamations and utterances of the responsible heads of the imperial German government, letters and diaries of German soldiers, quotations from German newspapers, and material drawn from the archives of the State Department which lay bare the story of inconceivable German atrocities. Maybe this book was before its time. I'm sorry, but because in World War I, Germany didn't really use any tactics that any other country didn't use. It was World War II that they did things that I would call atrocities. So I find that this is a little bit premature. I mean, except for, invading countries, but I think that's what every country does during wartime. So, yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that. The purpose of the book is to show that the system of frightfulness, itself the greatest atrocity, frightfulness, is the definite policy of the German government, so sinister that German soldiers have themselves at times revolted. Frightfulness, the system of frightfulness. Individual acts of wanton cruelty and barbaric destruction are cited only to illustrate the operation of the remorseless system. Well, I mean, war sucks anyway, but yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Except to say that World War I, Germany used the same tactics as every other country. There weren't anything majorly different than every other country that was fighting each other. I feel like I've said this recently, but if you are a soldier and you're just following orders during a war, then you're not committing war crimes. I guess the question, I mean, were they accusing Germany of war crimes during World War I? Here, I'm gonna look that up too, because this seems very fishy to me. Okay, was Germany accused of war crimes after World War I? Okay, the Leipzig war crime trials were trials held in 1921 to try alleged German war criminals of the First World War before the German Reichsgericht, Supreme Court in Leipzig, as part of the penalties imposed on the German government under the Treaty of Versailles. I'm going to read about this because now this is after this article was written. However, this will maybe bring to light something that happened. 12 people were tried with mixed results, but the proceedings were widely regarded at the time as a failure. In the longer term, they were seen by some as a significant step toward the introduction of a comprehensive system for the prosecution of international law violations. All right. So the background is, during the First World War, the Allied leaders came up with a new concept that once victory was achieved, defeated enemy leaders should face criminal charges for international law violations made during the war. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It identified the former Kaiser Wilhelm II as a war criminal and demanded that an extradition be requested to the Dutch government, which had given him asylum in the Netherlands since his abdication in November 1918. Article 228 allowed the Allied governments to try alleged German war criminals in military tribunals. In violation of the legal principle of double jeopardy, Allied prosecutions could proceed even in cases where the accused had already been tried, convicted, and sentenced in court-martial proceedings under German military law. The German government was required to comply with any extradition order issued by the Allied powers to that effect. Following the conclusion of the treaty, the Allied governments began their legal and diplomatic efforts to arrest the former Kaiser. Yeah, the treaty was signed. It's a diplomatic note. Eventually, the issue of trying Wilhelm was dropped as he remained in his Dutch estate until his death in 1941. In anticipation of further Allied action, the German National Assembly established a central bureau for the defense of Germans accused of war crimes. But there were only 12 tried, so I'm not sure why they needed a whole bureau. On 4 October 1919, in a meeting in Berlin, Johannes Goltsche of the Prussian Bureau of Investigation reported that his office had compiled some 5,000 detailed dossiers on Allied war crimes, which could be made immediately available to defense counsel in the event of prosecutions being brought against German soldiers. There you go. They didn't do anything that the others didn't do. Yeah? So they had 5,000 dossiers on Allied war crimes. Yeah? In February 1920, the Allies submitted a further list of 900 names of alleged war criminals to the German government. The Germans refused to extradite any German citizens to Allied governments and suggested instead trying them within the German justice system at the Reichsgericht in Leipzig. Yeah? This proposal was accepted by the Allied leaders, and in May 1920 they handed the Germans a reduced list of 45 accused persons. Not all these people could be traced, and in other cases there was difficulty in finding credible evidence. In the end, only 12 individuals were brought to trial. Wow. Also, then they mentioned, there's a guy mentioned them, Karl Heinen, Emil Müller, Robert Neumann, Ludwig Dittmar and John Bolt. John? His name is John. John Bolt. Bolt is a German name, but John not particularly. Is his name Johann? Max Ramdor, Karl Stinger, Adolf Laule, Hans von Schack, Benno Kruska. Okay, I'm just going to read like one of these. So two of these guys, Lieutenant General Hans von Schack and Major General Benno Kruska, were charged with 1,280 counts of murder for their actions during a 1915 typhus outbreak at a POW camp at Kassel. The court noted that out of 18 German doctors assigned to the camp, only 2 failed to catch the disease, and that 4 of them died from it. Also, 34 German guards of the camp had also caught typhus during the outbreak. The court... So what is that? Why are they telling you that? The court ultimately ruled that what most contributed to the outbreak of the epidemic was the order of the camp commandant that the Russians were to be placed with the other prisoners. Oh, it made it spread faster? The responsibility for this, however, rests exclusively with the High Command of the Army. An order for this was given by the War Office on the 18th of October 1914, and this order states that it was advisable to place Russian prisoners with their allies, the English and French. From the medical point of view, the doctor at the camp made representations against this. The higher authority insisted on their order, and the parties concerned had nothing to do but obey. In acquitting both defendants, the court declared General Kruska as well as General von Schack is, as the state attorney has said himself, to be acquitted absolutely. The trial before this court has not revealed even a shadow of proof for these monstrous accusations. So they were claiming that almost 1,300 people died of typhus because they put the Russian prisoners together with the American and the English and the French. But they eventually acquitted them because they were literally just following orders. Once again, you're following orders, you're not committing war crimes. And so I feel like so far I mean, I only read one, I understand. I did not read them all through. I'm sure there were some people who did things wrong, but in general, the Germans as a group really only, they did things that everybody else was doing. Like, they weren't really worse than the English or the French who were fighting each other. So, or the Russians. I mean, or any other group. I don't know how many groups fought. I think there were a lot, so I'm sure I missed several. Like, those were the key players in history, in a historical point of view. Like, I just don't feel like this is very justified. Like, saying that the Germans weren't behaving well as far as, like, the way they're behaving during war. I think this kind of a book, or this kind of an article on the book, is meant more to kind of work people up and make them be like, hey, I really want to go fight the Germans. You know, like, I feel like that's what it's about. It's not necessarily to be informative. It's just more to be a little propaganda-ish. That's what it feels like to me anyway. I'll look up the book again later, see if I can find an article about it maybe, because I can only find like the actual book that you could buy on Amazon apparently for $8.28. Anyway, okay. The book supplements the Bryce Report, which was the official survey of the path of horror, ruin, and death left by the German army on the lands of innocent and defenseless people. The book is supplemental also to the official reports by the Belgian Commission and the French Minister of Foreign Affairs, and it reveals more of the damning German war philosophy as expressed in the German White Book and the various official utterances, extenuating revolting crimes on the grounds of expediency and the advancement of that Kultur, which now mocks its own name through the civilized world. The humanity of German soldiers was so torn by the system of brutality that they cried out in letters to the ambassador Gerard, one expressing his protest, or Gerard, against the slaughter of the Russians in the Masurian lakes and swamps by saying, there is no God, there is no morality, and no ethics any more. There are no human beings any more, but only beasts. A free copy of this book can be obtained by addressing the Committee on Public Information at 10 Jackson Place, Washington, D.C. I prefer their articles on farming. Oh my goodness, this is just going slightly too far, that's all. I just kind of powered through that last, few sentences because this is ridiculous. This is literally ridiculous. Yeah, war sucks. I mean, when you're at war, it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong necessarily. Oh, it's on openlibrary.org. Maybe I can download it. Yeah, I can. Look at that. It's through archive.org. So it's powered by archive.org. Oh, it's very nice format. It's very book-like. Executive order, 192 pages. There's an introduction. I'm not going to read it, but because it's quite long. I feel like this kind of a thing would be interesting, but, it's only printed on every other page, so it's only about 100 pages long. Interesting that they would have, like, single-sided pages. I personally have never even seen that in a book. The back side has no printing on it. That's very strange to me. I'm just flipping through it real quick. Downloadable files. Get PDF. There you go. This is the format I usually get my stuff in, by the way. I don't literally do microfiche. It's called microfiche microphone because traditionally old newspapers and periodicals were on microfiche. I don't think there's an article about the book. Which is too bad because I was hoping that they would just explain what it was about. That it is propaganda or it's not. I'm going to take a closer look at the book itself again. And the one I just downloaded, German War Practices. And just take a look and see what I can see. So, Part 1, Treatment of Civilians. Edited by Dana C. Munro, Princeton University. John C. Sellery, University of Wisconsin, and August C. Cray, University of Minnesota. I feel like that's important because you need to know who did it, but also it says issued by the Committee on Public Information, the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, the Secretary of the Navy, George Creel. November 15th, 1917. Released for papers published on Monday, December 10th, and thereafter. For full permission to reprint is given to the press. Serial use is suggested. Executive Order. I hereby create a committee on public information to be composed of the Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of the Navy, and the civilian who shall be charged with the executive direction of the committee. As civilian chairman of the committee, I appoint Mr. George Creel. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, and the Secretary of the Navy are authorized each to detail an officer or officers to the work of the committee. Woodrow Wilson. April 14th, 1917. German policy of frightfulness. See, that's what I don't understand. Okay, so let's take a look real quick and see at Germany's policy of frightfulness. But Germany's military leaders had no intention of keeping the solemn promises. They had been trained along different lines. Their leading generals for many years have been urging a policy of frightfulness. In the middle of the 19th century, von Clausewitz, who was looked upon as the greatest military authority, and the methods which he advocated were used by the Prussian army in its successful wars of 1866 and 1871. Consequently, because these wars had been successful, the wisdom of von Clausewitz's methods seemed to the Prussian army to be fully proven. I'm going to go into it. Now, the essence of von Clausewitz's teachings was that successful war involves the ruthless application of force. In the opening chapter of his masterwork, Vom Kriege, on war, he says, violence arms itself with the inventions of art and science. Self-imposed restrictions, almost imperceptible and hardly worth mentioning, termed usages of international law, accompany it without essentially impairing its power. Now, philanthropic souls might easily imagine that there is a skillful method of disarming or subduing an enemy without causing too much bloodshed, and that is the true tendency of the art of war. However plausible this may appear, still it is an error which must be destroyed. For in such dangerous things as war, the errors which proceed from a spirit of good-naturedness are precisely the worst. As the use of physical force to the utmost extent by no means excludes the cooperation of the intelligence, it follows that he who uses force ruthlessly without regard to bloodshed must obtain a superiority if his enemy does not use it. So they're just saying that they advocate the use of very strong force? At least like around this time, 1877-78, there was a series of articles upon military necessity and humanity. General von Hartmann wrote in the same spirit. And I'm not going to read it because I'm sure it's the similar kind of a thing. Okay. In 1881, von Moltke had been commander-in-chief of the Prussian army in the Franco-Prussian War, declared, "Perpetual peace is a dream and not even a beautiful dream." Are you kidding me? War is an element in the order of the world established by God. By it, the most noble virtues of men are developed: courage and renunciation, fidelity and duty, and the spirit of sacrifice. Are you kidding me? The soldier gives his life. Without war, the world would degenerate and lose itself in materialism. That's so dumb. Oh my gosh. Many other examples might be cited from the writings of German generals. Okay, so it sounds like that there was a culture of brutality in war around that time that is not shared today, by the way, at least not in the Western world. I can't speak for every country in the world, but like, I feel like most of the Western world says military targets only, and you don't hurt civilians, ever. But it sounds to me like back then that there was this culture of brutality that people were trying to follow, but at the same time, it doesn't sound to me like Woodrow Wilson was completely against that. Just because the methods used during the war seemed to be similar. I know I'm making this really long, but I really want to get it right. Okay, so let's take a look at war practices of different countries in World War I. When war broke out, the Allied powers possessed greater overall demographic, industrial, and military resources than the Central Powers, and enjoyed easier access to the oceans for trade with neutral countries, particularly with the United States. Table 1 shows the steel production, and armed strength of the two rival coalitions. Okay. Oh yeah, they had like twice as much. except they had slightly lower steel production. Other than that, they had like twice as many people. Also, twice as many troops, or almost. And almost twice as many battleships. So yeah, that sounds about right. All the initial belligerents of World War I were self-sufficient in food, except Great Britain and Germany. I didn't know that. Great Britain's industrial establishment was slightly superior to Germany's. Okay, but Germany's diversified chemical industry facilitated the production of ersatz, or substitute materials, which compensated for the worst shortages ensuing from the British wartime blockade. Okay, yeah, they were very innovative. I didn't know that. German chemist Fritz Haber was already developing a process for fixation of nitrogen from air. This process made Germany self-sufficient in explosive and thus no longer dependent on imports of nitrates from Chile. Okay. Of all the initial belligerent nations, only Great Britain had a volunteer army, and this was quite small at the start of the war. The other nations had much larger conscript armies that required 3 or 4 years of service from able-bodied males of military age, to be followed by several years of reserve formations. Military strength on land was counted in terms of divisions composed of 12,000 to 20,000 officers and men. 2 more divisions made up an army corps, and 2 more of the corps. Okay. The land forces of the belligerent nations at the outbreak of the war in August 1814 are shown in Table 2. This is on Britannica.com, by the way, which is an encyclopedia if you didn't know that. This is interesting. The higher state of discipline, training, leadership, and armament of the German army reduced the importance of the initial numerical inferiority of the armies to the Central Powers. Because of the comparative slowness of mobilization, poor higher leadership, and lower scale of armament of the Russian armies, there was an approximate balance of forces between the Central Powers and the Allies in August 1914 that prevented either side from gaining a quick victory. Yeah. Germany and Austria also enjoyed the advantage of interior lines of communication, which enabled them to send their forces to critical points on the battlefronts by the shortest route. According to one estimation, Germany's railway network made it possible to move 8 divisions simultaneously from the Western Front to the Eastern Front in 4.5 days. Even greater in importance was the advantage that Germany derived from its strong military traditions and its cadre of highly efficient and disciplined regular officers, skilled in directing a war of movement and quick to exploit the advantages of flank attacks. German senior officers were to prove generally more capable than their Allied counterparts at directing the operations of large troop formations, okay? But once again, they seemed pretty well matched. Sea power was largely reckoned in terms of capital ships and dreadnought battleships and battle cruisers having extremely large guns. Despite intensive competition from the Germans, the British had maintained their superiority in numbers, with the result that in capital ships the Allies had an almost 2-to-1 advantage over the Central Powers. The strength of that 2 principal rivals at sea, Great Britain and Germany, is compared in Table 3. Okay, technology. I'm going to skip that part because that's not what this article was about. It wasn't about technology. Initial strategies. Okay, the Schlieffen Plan. Years before 1914, successive chiefs of the German General Staff had been foreseeing Germany's having to fight a war on 2 fronts at the same time, against Russia in the east and France in the west, whose combined strength was numerically superior to the Central Powers. The elder Helmut von Moltke, chief of German General Staff, they did mention him on the other one, yeah? From 1858 to 1888, decided that Germany should stay at first on the defensive in the west and deal a crippling blow to Russia's advanced forces before turning to counterattack the French advance. His immediate successor, Alfred von Waldsees, also believed in staying on the defensive in the west. Alfred Graf von Schlieffen, who served as chief of the German General Staff from 1891 to 1905, took a contrary view, and it was the plan he developed that was to guide Germany's initial wartime strategy. Schlieffen realized that on the outbreak of war, Russia would need 6 full weeks to mobilize and assemble its vast armies, given the immense Russian countryside and population. The sparsity of the rail network and the inefficiency of the government bureaucracy. Taking advantage of this fact, Schlieffen planned to initially adopt a purely defensive posture on the Eastern Front, with a minimal number of troops facing Russia's slowly gathering armies. Germany would instead concentrate almost all of its troops in the west against France and would seek to bypass France's frontier fortifications by an offensive through neutral Belgium to the north. This offensive would sweep westward and then southward through the heart of northern France, capturing the capital and knocking that country out of the war within a few weeks. Having gained security in the west, Germany would then shift its troops to the east and destroy the Russian menace with a similar concentration of forces. Well, that's basically what they did, isn't it? I mean, they went through Belgium into France. By the time of his retirement in 1905, Schlieffen had elaborated a plan for a great wheeling movement to the right, northern wing of the German armies, not only through central Belgium, but also in order to bypass the Belgian fortress of Liège and Namur in the Meuse Valley, through the southernmost parts of the Netherlands. With their right wing entering France near Lille, the Germans would continue to wheel westward until they were near the English Channel. They would then turn southward so as to sever the French army's line of retreat from France's eastern frontier to the south. I mean, yeah, this is all strategy. It's not, Eastern Front strategy. I'm actually going to skip that once again. This is not what we're talking about. Besides that, I'm not allowed to read this article aloud. Not the whole article. I mean, I'm just going to skip a whole bunch of it, yeah? Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, what I'm reading is that it sounds like they were just fighting, like armies fight, shooting at each other, things like that. They weren't doing anything more crazy than the other people were doing. I really don't think they were. Like, this is more technical than I'm gonna need, so I'm gonna ask Google just this question. Was the German army more brutal than the other armies in World War One? Too many W's. World War One. Facinghistory.org. Is that a book? Looks like it might be a book. Okay, so there's my plug. Buy this book. Brutal Realities of World War One. Yeah? Alright, I'm trying to skip as many parts as I can because I don't want to make this video an hour long. So, also, I want to only read the parts of the article in the book that is actually relevant and is still within free use. So, we don't want to get copyright striked. So here's my plug. Please buy this book. It looks very interesting. If you are interested in war history from World War One, of course. Okay, on both sides of the conflict, many came to believe that what they were experiencing was not war, but mass slaughter. Ooh. Okay. Unlike the war on Germany's Western Front, the war on the Eastern Front was a war of rapid movement. Armies repeatedly crisscrossed the same territories. Civilians were frequently caught in the crossfire, and millions were evacuated from their home and expelled from territories as armies approached. The carnage was incomprehensible to everyone as millions of soldiers and civilians alike died. And then you have estimates of the numbers, which was very high, by the way. And just like World War II, who lost the most people? Russia did. I'm sorry, Russia, that you lost so many people. I really am. That's awful. Germany didn't even lose as many, although they almost lost as many during World War One. That's 11 million people, total mobilized forces, or 11 million. Russia was 12. Total casualties in Russia, 9.1 million, and in Germany, 7.1 million. And in France, 6.1 million, which is extremely high. And so I feel like France was kind of the victim of World War One. And then in Britain, there was 3.1 million people lost. Italy, 2.1 million. And then other countries to a lesser extent. Austria-Hungary, 7 million. And then the other countries are less than a million. And they said that the estimates are not that reliable. That doesn't tell me if Germany was considered more brutal than the Allies. But I don't know. Like, what I'm seeing is I don't see anything majorly different. Here we go. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about the modern battlefield is the desolation and emptiness of it all. Nothing is to be seen of war or soldiers, only the split and shattered trees and a burst of an occasional shell reveal anything of the truth. One can look for miles and see no human being, but in those miles of country lurk, like moles or rats, it seems thousands, even hundreds of thousands of men, planning against each other perpetually some new device of death. Never showing themselves, they launch at each other bullet, bomb, arrow, torpedo, and shell. And somewhere, too, are the little cylinders of gas waiting only for the moment to spit forth their nauseous and destroying fumes. And yet the landscape shows nothing of all this. Nothing but a few shattered trees, or 3 or 4 thin lines of earth and sandbags. These, the ruins of towns and villages, are the only signs of war everywhere. Wow. And that was told by Harold Macmillan, who later became Prime Minister of Britain, and he sent that in a letter home, according to this article. What I was reading seems like the German strategies were pretty similar to the Allied strategies. You're just shooting at each other and doing regular war stuff. At the same time, it does bring home to me how brutal that really is. So calling it brutal, I don't think is necessarily incorrect or like too far-fetched. However, calling it more brutal than other countries is. It feels like it was about the same as any other country that was at war. And at the same time, because it is something brutal, I feel very grateful that I live in a country that is not at war at the moment. And I hope that it will stay that way. And I sincerely hope that I don't personally have to experience this part of the human experience. And I hope that all of my listeners don't as well. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't happen. So, leave your opinions in the comments below. If you are a World War I expert and know all about it, please enlighten me, because I just spent I don't know how long working on this and looking things up, and I only found a tiny little fraction of what there is to be found. So if anybody knows so much more than I do, please put it in the comments below. I am very interested. I'm interested in all things history, so please share. And I hope you enjoyed this Microfiche time capsule. It was a little bit different than usual with all of the looking up, and I spent more time looking things up than I did reading the actual article, which was actually quite short. Unlike the original book, which was quite long. I am not reading the book on this channel. I refuse. We're just not going to go there. It feels very propaganda-y. So very much the Germans are the worst and we're the best kind of a book. So I don't think we need that. But if you did enjoy the video and learned something today, then please like and subscribe the video and come back for the next one. I hope to see you in the next Microfiche time capsule.